This is Amy Chan from CakeDecoratingSchool.com, and if you like cake decorating, you're in the right place. Welcome to our flower series. In this video, we'll be piping buttercream azalea flowers. It's broken down into steps so you can skip ahead, rewind, and rewatch as desired. Let's get started making our colors. We're going to make two colors today, or two hues. We're going to make some pink and also some brown. We're using all American style buttercream, and I'm going to make my pink, and I need more of it, so I've got quite a bit in my bowl today. We're going to use 3 liquid gel colors: neon bright pink, coal black, and finally some buckeye brown. Oh, there we go. And to start with, I'm going to make my pink, and I'm going to use some of that neon bright pink, but just a little bit because you don't need much to make a pastel shade. So I got a little bit out on my lid with a toothpick along with a touch of my coal black because I want to make a nice, cool kind of pink color. So I'm just going to make a little bit of pink to start with. Then we're going to mix it around, kind of see where we're going, and I'm going to add just a teeny touch of that black. I don't want to do too much. I just want to make it kind of a cool shade of pink, and that'll kind of help it along in that direction. So once I've got that black in there, I'll probably add just a little bit more pink, since that can make it look almost a little bit purplish, which is where we are now. So I want it to definitely be pink. I want it to kind of be like a low chroma version of pink that kind of tracks over onto the cool side versus being a warm color. That's looking great. I think just a little touch more pink should do it. There we go. And this is going to be a beautiful shade for our flowers. We have a nice, there it is, light pink shade. It's kind of like an ice pink, so it has a bit of a cool tone to it. It's going to look great with the walnut brown we're going to make for our dots and our centers. Our second color is going to be a nice brown. So we want to make kind of a walnut brown, so something nice, deep and dark. I've just got a little bit of buttercream in my bowl since I don't need a lot. And we'll start with 2 drops of my buckeye brown. And I'm going to add 1 of my black. And that should give us a nice, deep, rich shade. And if it's not quite enough color, which really I think it should be given how much buttercream we're using because there's not very much, you can just kind of keep repeating that ratio. And it won't be as dark to begin with because it'll take just a little bit of time to develop. But you can see where it's going, where we have a nice kind of brown black. Gives me that kind of like dark, rich feeling of maybe like potting soil, and reminds me of like beautiful walnut wood when it's finished. So we have a nice kind of dark, deep brown shade, and that's going to be beautiful for the centers of our azaleas. For this flower, we're going to use 2 bags. We're using both 12-inch disposable decorating bags. You can see one we've got fitted directly with the tip. And on our pink, we're using a coupler because we're actually going to use the coupler to pipe. So while we're not changing tips, the coupler will be important. For our brown, we're using a number 1 tip. So any small round tip. If you don't have a number 1, try a number 2. For a bag of pink, we have it fitted with a coupler, and we're using a 104 tip. Let's review the techniques we're going to use for our azalea flower. The first thing we're going to do is use just the large part of the coupler inside the bag to pipe a mound. That's just going to give us a little bit of control because of the circular opening and a nice big opening. So we want to do it just like we're going to pipe a dot, where we hold it up off the surface, give ourselves a big mound. You can kind of wiggle it to control the shape a little bit and just let it build up. And typically I do it about 2 inches high. We want enough height that we can pipe a petal on there and leave a little bit of space at the bottom. We want a nice big support mound since we're going to pipe typically 3 blossoms around it to make a clump of azaleas. We're also going to pipe some little supports for this flower, and this is just to kind of give our petals some natural, I guess, grade to them without them kind of flopping down on us or being hard to get in there towards the bottom. And this will make sense later, but just know for these, we're going to hold the bag straight up and down. We're using our 104 tip, and really, I just call them support wedges. I'm just going to give myself a little squeeze, and it's just to give myself that little kind of ridge of frosting. If you need to, you can always go a little bigger. Just something for that petal to lay on to help give it a little more of a natural gradation for the ones that are going to be on the bottom close to the nail. And for our petals, we're also going to use our 104. All the petals are technically going to be the same. We're just going to alter the exact positioning of the bag so that we're piping some up our mounds, some on the nail, some off to the side, but it's the same general teardrop shape where you start where the center of the actual blossom is going to be, and that's where the fat end is attached. Skinny end a little bit off the surface. On the back of a bag is kind of off towards 1:30, 2 o'clock, and we're at 45 degrees. You're going to pull out, give it a rotate, either by turning the bag or turning your nail, and then pull back. And that's going to give us a nice classic teardrop shaped petal. We're going to do 2 things with our bag of brown that has our number 1 tip on it. First, some dots. These are going to go on the actual petals of our flowers because azaleas typically have little dots on their petals. So it's a nice way to make a realistic flower. And just like when we did our big mound or any other dot, you just want to be up above the surface, not very much because it's a small tip, and just give it a gentle circle around. And you can see, basically, we're going for those super tiny specks. So they don't have to be perfect, and it's actually really good practice for dots. And then we're going to do some spikes. For our spikes, we're going to start the same as we would for a dot, where we squeeze, let it build up, and then we're going to pull away while we're still squeezing. And that's going to give us long, beautiful, hairy spikes. And we'll do them really close together so that they have some support and they can kind of hang over. And that's going to give us the centers of our flowers. Now, let's go over how we're going to combine the techniques we just reviewed to create our azalea blossoms. And azaleas are one of those flowers where you typically see like 3 to 5 of them together. So we're going to pipe 3 on that mound to give us the look of a clump of azaleas, because a single flower by itself won't quite capture the essence. So the first thing we're going to do is pipe that support mound with just our couplers. So you want to take the tip off. You can leave the ring on if you feel like the inside might slip around a little in the bag, if that makes it feel secure, but you don't even have to. We're going to pipe that mound so it's just, right, not as quite as wide as a single flower, but we want it to be just a little bit taller than one of our petals. So think one of those teardrop shaped petals plus about 1/4 inch on the bottom. So if you need to, you can always measure your petal. And we want it to be nice and fat so it's secure. We have space to get 3 blossoms around it, but it doesn't actually have to be much wider than it is tall. So it doesn't need to be too fat. We're going to start out by putting the 104 tip on our coupler, and we're going to pipe those 3 top petals. So if you think about each flower a little bit like a stick figure, it's got a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. The first thing we're going to do is pipe all 3 of those little head petals on there, and that'll help us with our spacing. Then we'll use that 104 tip to pipe little mounds, kind of as like feet is a great way to think of them, right underneath each head. So they're going to kind of come out in almost like a V shape, and those are going to act as supports for the petals that are going to go on them. So then on top of each of those mounds, once we finish them, we're going to pipe another petal. Same teardrop shaped petal, but we're going to line the fat end of the tip on the side of the mound, right underneath that top one. Pull one out on one side, one out on the other side. Don't worry if they're perfect or not. And there's actually 2 ways you can do this. So you can work away from yourself in the kind of traditional orientation, or you can flip the tip over and pull towards yourself. I'd say give it a try both ways. It's a little riskier if you work away because you almost have to tilt the nail towards yourself while you're working. So just a little note of caution. I find it easier sometimes to flip it towards myself because then I can just work with the whole thing level and I don't have to worry about something maybe tipping off my nail, especially if I'm almost finished with it. So once we get those two petals on for each of the blossoms around there, we're going to add the side ones on. And these side ones are a little tricky at first. The first two might feel a little unsupported. They might feel kind of flat against the surface. That's fine. As you go around and do the ones on the side for the next couple of blossoms, those first two you created will act almost like a support for the other ones, and will help them kind of stand out and give them some depth, and give the whole thing a little bit of interest and some kind of three-dimensional feel. So we're using the support mound and also some of those petals to act as supports. Once you've got all 5 petals on for the 3 blossoms we're going to do, you want to go in, put a few dots on each of those petals, and then pipe a clump of those spikes in the middle for some stamens. Once we finish that, we'll have a beautiful clump of azalea flowers. Now that we've reviewed our techniques, let's start practicing on our nail. I have a 3-inch flower nail that I've covered with a piece of parchment. I've got just a little bit of buttercream on there to keep it nice and stable. And I've got my bag fitted with just my coupler to start with. I want to be up off the surface so that frosting can balloon out. And my goal here is to make my mound about 1 inch, maybe just a little bit bigger in diameter. That way I still have a full inch border all the way around on my nail to work on. And I want it to be about 1.5 inches high. So just give it a little wiggle if you need to, and just really go up and let it taper a bit on top. But it doesn't need to be too big, right? Just enough to kind of support those petals and really give us a nice surface to work on. Mine's just a little off center, so you can always adjust it a little bit too. We just want it to be on there relatively in the center so we have a nice space to work on with a nice border all the way around. We've got our mound on our nail, and we're going to start by piping our 3 upright petals. So these are the ones we kind of called our little heads on our little stick man. So we're going to start with that fat end of the tip right just above the surface, so about 1/2 inch. And we're going to draw our beautiful teardrop shaped petals on the side. So you can see I pulled up, give it a little rotate, and then it'll be easy to pull back down. And we want to do 3 of those. We want them to be kind of equally spaced. If your mound gets a little off, it slumps to one side or the other, you can kind of adjust it with your tip. Don't be afraid to touch it. Don't be afraid to work with it. And if you need to, and it's easier when doing this, don't be afraid to rock your nail back and forth a little bit. So same thing, just start a little away from the edge so you have room to grow out, spin, and come back down. And then our final one, you just want to start in the middle of those 2. So you can see I've got 2 petals there, fat end right there in the middle, and go up the side, rotate, and come back down. And then you can see we've got them kind of equally spaced out. It pretty much encloses the entire mound. You're not going to see very much of it all when we're done, and it pretty much eclipses the top. And maybe you could have done this one just a little further over, but that's fine. When we start getting the petals on the side, it's going to cover up a lot of that area. You won't even really see it. So now that we've got that on there, we're going to pipe some supports. So to get my supports on there, I want to go that end of the tip towards my mound, right underneath, and think about making a little V shape out from each of those petals. So that's going to give us a little guide, something to shoot for when we're piping our petals on, and help us line up. And it's just going to give a little support and make our petals a little more natural, the angle. They're going to kind of slope out from that center, and that's going to give it a nice kind of almost trumpet-like vibe to our finished little blossoms. So to pipe the petals on the bottom, the little feet for each of our little flower people, we're going to hold the tip kind of backwards from what we normally do, and we're going to pull towards ourselves. So the fat end's still towards the center. This time the skinny end is going to be pointing towards me, right, towards myself. And I'm just going to go out from that center, rotate, and pull back. And just be careful when you hit the back part. Don't want to knock into your previous petal, but you can see then it lays right on top of that little support. And then I'm going to do a second one. right there. If you find it easier, if that's a little awkward, you can always work on the other side of the nail. This takes just a little more practice, but it's a little bit more, I would say, normal, what you're used to doing, where you're pulling away from yourself and back. And if you have those two little supports on there, it gives you a good guide of where to place your petals. So it does take a little bit, it's a little tricky because you kind of have to tilt the nail towards yourself while you're working, and that can be a little scary, especially if it's a warm day or you feel like your frosting is maybe a little soft or not quite cooperating. But we're nice and chilly in here today, so it's perfectly fine to do this. If you're working and it's a little warm, you can always stick everything in the refrigerator for a couple of minutes just to give yourself a little more flexibility. So sometimes if I'm working on something and it's getting soft, I just put it on my nail block and put it in the fridge if I have to do something like that, where it kind of makes your heart rate go up a little bit if you do a little tilting or a little leaning. But you can see now we have our little heads and our feet on, and our next step will be to put on our arms. Now let's put on our little side petals. So these are going to be like the little arms, and we're just going to go off to the side. The first two you do on your first flower might flop over a little bit. That's okay. They're going to act almost like a support for the final ones, where the other ones on our other blossoms are going to rest on top of them. So if they look a little lackluster, that's totally okay. So just start like you normally would, fat end there, nice teardrop shape petal to the side, and then work in on the other side. And you can see now we've got that petal there. When we go to do the next one, it's going to sit right on top of it, and it acts as a support because they're going to want to stick together. Just kind of go in right there. If they fold over a little on themselves, that's totally fine. Just rotate your bag and your tip any way you need to get them in there. You can see now we've got all 5 petals on for each of them. You've got those 3 blossoms. The mound is the same color, so any little bits poking through kind of disappear for you. And we're ready to put some details on these by putting some dots on those petals that'll really help them stand out from each other and putting on our centers. So we want to add some detail to these. So I've got my bag with my number 1 tip. I'm ready to go, and I just want to put on a few tiny dots, probably anywhere from 3 to 5 on each of my petals. So just a little squeeze and finish them off wherever you can. And that's going to help those petals kind of stand out. And then we can go in the middle of each and start pulling some little stamens. And I find it easiest to work down low first and then kind of pull up the sides, out the center, and the top. And if some of them flop over, that's totally fine. But you can see then you get a cute little center for your flowers. And just work around and do each of these. So it takes just a little time. Just a few little quick dots. And then we'll finish each one with some nice little spikes for a nice little frilly center. Sometimes they'll flop over on you. You can just go ahead and do another one by building up some of those little spikes. You end up getting a little bit of support, and then you can really pipe some nice little kind of high drama ones that really pull out. So go ahead and finish this up by piping a center on our last little blossom. And there you can see we have a cute little clump of azalea flowers that has a lot of depth and dimension, and these look gorgeous on the top of cakes, just kind of all by themselves if you want to do a bunch of little clumps of azaleas, or along with some other flowers. And that's it. for this lesson. We hope you enjoyed making azalea flowers with us. And if you did, you'll check out some of our other flower series videos, like maybe our basic rose or our great daisy. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like more about the cake decorating materials and equipment we use, or just some inspirational videos about cake decorating itself, you can follow us on Insta or YouTube at Cake Decorating School. If you'd like to know more about yearly membership and what it entails, you can go to www.cakedecoratingschool.com for more information. And if you're interested in these products, you can check the links in the description.